Welcome to Explained. I'm Louis van die Kerk and I'm here to tell you about compounding interest. In our first video, we explained to you pretty much how the mechanisms of compounding interest works and why Einstein calls it the eighth wonder of the world. Those who understand it earn it, those who don't pay it. This is part of a three-part series. This is the second part. And here we're going to apply some of the compounding interest knowledge into buying a home. And the way that we're going to do it is by virtue of an example. Jack and Jill are both going to buy a home. They're going to pay around $1 million for it. And they have to pay it off over 20 years as per most financial institutions' regulations around mortgages or bonds as they're called in different countries. The difference between Jack and Jill is that Jack decides to pay the required amount over the 20-year period, and Jill decides to pay a little bit more as inflation requires or actually allows her to do. So maybe a word on inflation. So effectively, if you have high inflation, say 10%, if you had $1,000 today, you need to have $1,100 a year later for it to be of the same value. Conversely, typically if you earned $1,000 this year, you ought to then earn $1,100 a year later to have the same buying power. So what happens with a mortgage that is paid off over 20 years, whether the inflation is 1%, 2% or 20%, if you pay the same amount over the 20-year period, effectively your premium becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper because the salary amounts gets increased with inflation. The buying power of money is reduced because you need more money because of inflation to buy the same stuff. So a guy that keeps paying the required premium over a 20-year period effectively pays a very cheap premium at the 20th year. And this is what Jack did. So Jack now has more and more money every year that he can spend on other stuff. Jill, on the other hand, recognizes that, look, I can afford a portion of my salary every month to pay into my mortgage. And so if my salary increases by inflation and I pay the same portion of my salary, I just increase my mortgage repayments with inflation as well. Now the impact is really what's important. Because of what Jill does, she effectively pays off her house, I think, around the 17th or 18th year. Incidentally, if inflation is much higher, you can sometimes pay off your house after 8 or 9 years. I think where inflation is 10%, that's the figure. But with inflation only 2%, as in this example, you pay your house off after 17 years. Why is that? Because in the first video I explained that in a repayment scheme, if you had to pay back $1,000, the first period you're effectively paying mostly interest and a tiny bit of capital. So you still owe the whole amount. You've just paid off some of the interest. And in your last period, you pay off mostly capital and a little bit of interest. And it's over on a sliding scale over the 20-year period that it marries up. So if you from period 1 or from period 13, when the first inflationary increase comes along, pay the inflationary component. You've now paid your tiny bit of capital, your portion of interest, and now that extra inflationary bit comes off the capital. So you are killing off capital much faster than Jack would be in this example, which is why you get to pay your house off much sooner. But more importantly, Jill does something else that's also smart. Jill doesn't stop paying after 17 years. She recognizes that this is the amount that she pays every year. And so she simply continues to pay that up to 20 years because her friend Jack is still paying off his mortgage. So in solidarity, she continues to pay, but she already pays a much higher amount. She's used to that. She hasn't lived into a much higher lifestyle. And so that saving element is now starting to work for her in terms of compounding interest, as I've explained in the first video. So systematically, Jill she's now got an asset that's paid off and she's saving. The net effect is that after 20 years, Jack has the house to the value of $1 million, and that's what he's got. He's paid a lot of interest, but he's got $1 million. Jill, on the other hand, has $1 million house, but she, in addition to that, has $437,000 in a bank account, which is a massive, massive difference. That's 40% on her way to buying her second house. So if she were to apply that to a second house, within 16, 15 years, she would have paid off her second house in the process. And if you can think about this, and perhaps there's another video of that coming, she can take that 400,000, apply that as a deposit. That would give her a repayment value, which is equivalent to what the rental would be that a tenant would pay her. And all of a sudden, she's now leveraged a mechanism to start creating wealth while someone else is actually paying the rent. Okay, so Jack and Jill both bought houses. Jill made few sacrifices. Jill did not use the discount that inflation would allow her to live a bit better. She made some sacrifices, and it's going to pay off for her big time because Jill is smart. She understands compounding interest. That's why she earns it rather than pays it. You have to appreciate that paying interest is sometimes inevitable, and it is an enabler. You cannot avoid interest if you want to buy a house or a car because it enables you to actually buy this asset which you didn't have the cash for. What is critical is to pay as little as possible and to convert the payments into money that earns compounding interest for you rather than you paying the compounding interest. And this is exactly what our third video in the series is about. Here we're going to show you how when buying a car, if you prepare to make sacrifices early on in your career, you will be in so much better position. So I'll put a link in here for you to follow that video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you're welcome to like it. This channel is here to help and explain stuff to you which perhaps otherwise would have been a bit more complex. My name is Louis van Niekerk, and I hope that was properly explained.